Don't look. Wah! Rangobart's head jerked back as Dimir reached up to clamp her hands over his eyes. Weren't you just screaming at us to look? Rangobart said. I asked the Prez to look, Dimir replied. You were not allowed to look. Someone please make some sense. Why wasn't he allowed to look at a tree? Why was Lady Waldenstein allowed to? Weren't they surrounded by other people who could also see the aforementioned tree? There hadn't been any sign of a commotion before they arrived. Dimir's right, Lady Waldenstein said. You shouldn't look. Lady Zaradnik, is it appropriate for this individual to be walking around like this? Glazer always walks around like this, Lady Zaradnik replied. Gee Glazer? Hi. He turned his head slightly at the sound of a youthful, sweet-sounding voice. Dimir's grip over his eyes tightened. Lady Waldenstein mentioned that Baroness Zaradnik's daughter was named Glazer, but the child wouldn't be able to talk yet. Introduce yourself properly, Lady Zaradnik said. The voice sounded again, accompanied by the rustle of countless leaves. Dame Glazer Jelgronvid, custodian of the harbour. It's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Dame Glazer. Frian von Gushmund, head Imperial Court Mage of the Baharuth Empire. If you don't mind my asking, what is it that you do as custodian of the harbour? I manage the ecology of the area, I guess? Things are pretty barren right now, but they're getting better. I've been promoting similar approaches to urban management wherever I can, Lady Zaradnik said. You've already seen a version of it in Korlin Harbour. Dame Glazer is a druid in service to the harbour and the future city that will rise here, hopefully one of many. If one wanted to do the same thing in the Empire, Lady Waldenstein asked, what tangible benefits could be used to whet the Imperial administration's appetite? Rangobart was of the mind that the Imperial administration would rather light itself on fire than have druids have a say in how the Empire was run. Throughout Imperial history, druids resisted Imperial policy at every turn, demanding unacceptable restrictions on territorial expansion and industrial development. They even interfered through third parties, as was the case with the Adventurer Guild turning or putting a premium on commissions that druids insisted were harmful to nature or even outright rejecting them. The most aggressive officials in every generation insisted on labeling them enemies of the state. That would depend on the situation, Lady Zaradnik answered. Thinking would be so entrenched in the imperial heartlands that introducing druids for any government work might be impossible. An entirely unestablished territory on the frontier like Viscount Roberbad's, however. You make it sound as if the imperial administration is the only obstacle to their collaboration, Rangobart said as he guessed at Lady Zaradnik's location. The druids themselves are implacable when it comes to expansion and development. I can see how it seems like that in the experience of the Empire, the Baroness said. But I doubt that's actually the case. In fact, the seemingly hopeless resistance against imperial expansion over the past 2 centuries should weigh things in your favor. The region's druids should leap at the chance to preserve even a portion of your land. It's exactly the sort of opportunity that you need to begin integrating them into the civil service and demonstrating their value to the Empire. I hope I can strike a compromise acceptable to both sides, Rangobart said. Since you propose to focus on urban development, the druids should have plenty of time to justify their demands. This is assuming that the Empire is satisfied with your plans as they stand. He couldn't imagine that they would. Never mind promising development or his new position in the Imperial Army, the Sorceress Kingdom had clearly taken an interest in him. The Imperial administration would step lightly around anything he did out of fear that they would run afoul of some inscrutable plan and bring the wrath of their suzerain down on their heads. Not to sound rude or anything, Glazer said, but is there something wrong with that guy? I sometimes wonder about that myself, Lady Waldenstein replied. If he needs healing. Rangobart freed himself from Dimir's grip. His eyes took a moment to readjust to the bright afternoon sun, and then he found himself staring at a beautiful woman girded in a scant layer of red gold leaves. A dryad? I knew it, Dimir sighed. He got charmed. I didn't do anything, the leafy woman said in Glazer's voice. I haven't been charmed, Rangobart shot Dimir a look. That just makes it worse. Why do women always go in that direction? She's not even a human. There was also that Ulrana last winter, Lady Zaradnik noted. I'm telling your mother, Dimir said. You know my mother? Rangobart frowned. Not yet. Rangobat tore his gaze away from the dryad. His mother had warned him about vampire women in the Sorceress Kingdom. Hearing about a dryad might also send her into hysterics. So, he cleared his throat. Are there any specific examples of Dame Glaz's work in Warden's Vale? I'm right here, you know. Lady Zaradnik hugged the sullen dryad around the shoulder affectionately. She's still attending classes, but she's growing quickly. Work around the village uses about half of my mana, Dame Glaza said, even after the temple staff moved in. If you're looking for stuff that you can see, I'm making dirt for the village. Dirt? Yup, dirt. Haven't you seen the little patches of grass and other plants around the square? He had, but he hadn't given any more thought to them than he would a tuft of grass growing out of a crack in a city street. Were they truly so significant? If you need dirt, Dimir said, why not cart some in from the surroundings? I could, Dame Glaza said, but it's not so simple as that. The ultimate goal is to create a system that can absorb and convert waste as quickly as the people can generate it, and it has to be done in such a way that it doesn't disrupt the harbor's functions. I have to figure out the right mix of critters, plants, and other things to accomplish that. Do you mean to say that the harbor will process its own waste? Rangobat asked. In such a way that there isn't any excess? Waste was an ever-present issue that few gave much thought to. Every village, town, and city had a dump tucked away as far as feasible for its population. Those who were fortunate enough to have rivers could dump everything into the water, while landlocked places periodically burned their trash piles once they grew unbearable to live near. The ashes were spread over the fields as fertilizer, but the results never made up for the costs of waste management. There will always be excess, the Dryad said. Especially since the harbor relies on imports to exist. Crafting materials are recycled whenever possible while the rest is turned into dirt. Once we get to the forest city stage, the city will produce specialized raw materials of its own for processing and export. We need to build the foundation for that system of production now in order to benefit from it later. Urban centers were always considered centers of specialized production, but he had never heard of a city that produced raw resources in any significant quantity. They simply imported food and materials for their specialists and churned out the results. Glaza. A girl called out from the rows of summons, are you going to help? Coming. With a bob of her leafy head, Dame Glaza excused herself to join the children equipping summons. A death knight stomped after her, cradling a potted tree in its arms. I can't say I've ever heard of such a mobile dryad, Rangobat said. I didn't even realize it was possible. She'll put down her roots once she's ready, Lady Zaradnik said. And so you'll have an eternal custodian for the harbor. That's quite the convenient arrangement. Rather than a convenient arrangement, it's something like a natural one. A dryad always tends to the area around her tree. The area around Dame Glaza's tree will be the part of the city she's responsible for. I suppose that's one thing I can't bring back with me, Rangobat said. Pervert, Nemel said. Not you, too, Rangobat sighed. He turned around to find Nemel and her friends standing behind him. Beyond them was a crowd of goblins disembarking from a line of wagons. I saw you ogling Dame Glaza on the way in, Nemel said. Noble or commoner, you men are all the same. She's not even human. Just so you know, she probably regards you as a tree with a sparrow. It's not quite like that, Lady Zaradnik said. Miss Gran has the right idea, though. Dame Glaza doesn't see things as a human does. Doesn't that cause problems? Rangobat asked. It's mostly the harbor's citizens treating her as if she's a human. She understands what they're doing so nothing major ever happens. It was a wonder that it didn't. Dryads were powerful heteromorphs that were notorious for attacking and abducting frontiersmen. A dryad would usually never allow anyone near their tree if they could help it, never mind putting it in a pot. Nemel, Ida said, the sergeants are waiting for you. I'll be right there, Nemel replied. Please excuse me, everyone. Rangobat's gaze followed Nemel curiously as she went to address a line of goblins standing with their wolves nearby. 3 skewers each, she said as Fendros, Ida, and Liz handed out small coin purses. Make sure you spread them out between matches. Remember that it's alright to get excited, but make sure you behave yourselves. The goblins saluted and led their troops to the row of colorful tents, leaving a small group of nervous-looking humans behind. Nemel followed the goblins, flitting back and forth between the queues, making sure that the goblins were buying their food properly. "It looks like Nemel is going to have the biggest showing," Lady Zaradnik said. "When you said that it was an event," Rangobot said, "I didn't expect something on the order of a town fair." "We have a high participation rate," the Baroness said. "It isn't the grand arena yet, but over half of my human subjects have been attending them. I've been talking with Corlin about encouraging her people to take the trip upriver for them as well." "How often do these league matches happen again?" "Once a week." Rangobot's gaze passed over the ever-increasing activity at the stands. Wagons were now arriving regularly, offloading groups of gaily dressed citizens. The Grand Arena of our winter was supposedly a profitable operation that gleaned the riches of the imperial capital, but he couldn't figure out if the league matches in Warden's Vale were the same. "I can't imagine what this will be like in the future," he said. "This is a little battlefield. How do people follow the action?" "The stands are purposely widened to allow spectators to stay close to the fighting. The matches are still small due to their low rank, but we'll have to figure out a better way to spectate them before they get too large and complex." "Low rank, are they in any way similar to arena leagues?" Lady Waldenstein asked. "No, they're tied to how we rank commanders. Each rank has its accompanying budget for both army size and season funding." "Season funding?" "Yes, that's right. A season is essentially a campaign where each commander has to manage their armies within the bounds of a predetermined budget. Copper and iron rank commanders run squads while silver and gold ranks run companies. We're still adjusting things from season to season." The campaign in the Draconic Kingdom showed that 2 silver rank commanders can easily direct entire army fronts with a proper officer structure under them. The problem is that Warden's Vale doesn't have the industrial output to accommodate an army-sized budget. "Anyway, we should return to our seats before things get started." They rejoined Lormer at his place on the top tier of seating. Another elf stood beside him, a mirror image aside from the fact that he was wearing pants. "Good afternoon, Lady Aura," Lady Zaradnik said. "Hey, the one in the skirt is a boy and the one in the pants is a girl. Could it be that you're the Dark Elf twins mentioned in that one report?" Lady Waldenstein asked. "What report?" Lady Aura frowned. "The one that, on second thought, forget that I asked." Lady Waldenstein went to stand on the far side of Rangobot, and then Dimir seemed to recall something and went to stand on the far side of Lady Waldenstein. Rangobot considered resetting their order for a moment before Dame Glaser appeared and went to stand between Lord Mayor and Lady Zaradnik. He pondered the arrangement, recalling last Waldenstein's whisperings. "So Lord Mayor is rumored to be Lady Zaradnik's consort. Is that why she didn't seem to fancy anyone while she was in the Empire? She prefers much younger partners, or is it older? He may look like that, but he's probably older than my father's father." To be fair, it wasn't uncommon for women to be taken by boyish flavors. Lord Mayor may very well be a deadly combination, possessing youthful looks while avoiding the pitfalls of mental immaturity, except he wasn't sure how it worked for elves. At the least, distinct age gaps between partners were probably common given their longevity. A century or 3 of age difference may have been perfectly acceptable, but then there was the matter of Dame Glaser. Half-elves were the result of a union between a human and an elf, not a dryad. At first, he had thought the dryad's name a clear coincidence, but... "Lady Zaradnik." "Yes? Is Dame Glaser your daughter?" A strangled noise came from Lady Waldenstein. Lady Zaradnik's lip twitched slightly. "We don't mind the association," she said. "My subjects always refer to us in those terms." "I see. Well, whatever." As they waited for the armies to take the field, Rangobot listened to Lord Mayor and Dame Glaser discuss druidic magic. Could he entice druids to his new territory as easily as Lady Zaradnik asserted? The longer he stayed and learned, the more he itched to get started with his fief. "I think they're coming," Dimir said. "They are assuming their positions," Lady Zaradnik told her. "This is a Silver League match, so they have roughly company-sized contingents to organize." While the battlefield was long, it was also narrow enough to see everything that was going on. Lines of undead soldiers adorned in equipment and tabards in the colors of their respective teams, red for Raoul and blue for Olga, took positions out of sight of the opposing army. Neither assumed the bold formations that the forces of the Empire or Riastais always used, instead opting to deny as much information to their opponent as possible. Is this positioning due to your influence? Rangobart asked. Yes and no, Lady Zaradnik answered. I'm almost certain that this is the result of the training itself. The objective of these matches is to defeat the other side, and they train in similar battles every day. Superfluous strategies and tactics that were conceived as a means to convey national and martial prestige are quickly cast aside. They stopped using the traditional formations employed in the region by the time the first season ended. Are they starting? Dimir pointed. There wasn't even an announcement. Even if there wasn't, the crowd hushed as the different formations went into play. Rangobart focused on two groups of armored wights that seemed to be trying to flank their unseen opponents. He looked at the distant towers with a frown. It looks like they know what's on the other side, he said. Look up, Lady Zaradnik said. He immediately spotted two flights of winged creatures similarly trying to outmaneuver one another. I see, he nodded thoughtfully. That's something the Imperial Army seldom has to worry about. The Imperial Army enjoyed air supremacy in nearly every operation. The only time he could think of when that wasn't the case was during the Blister campaign, and that was only in the brief period that the Viridian Dragon Lord was active. What happens now? He asked. Do they try to dominate the air before moving on the ground? It's never so clear-cut these days, Lady Zaradnik said. If they commit too many resources and attention to the air battle, they'll lose on the ground. Essentially, the skirmish phase of a battle has been extended to the air. How does a single commander manage the sheer complexity of everything happening at once? They don't. Just like any army, they have subordinates. The Sorceress Kingdom uses elder liches as sergeants. As they spoke, the swirling dance above them grew in intensity and dove toward the field. Excited shouts rose as the winged swarm resolved into dozens of bone vultures. The dive angled ever so slightly, sending them straight at a group of Blue Team's ground skirmishers. This is crazy, Rangobart breathed. The attackers might take out their ground targets, but their pursuers will tear them to shreds. Just as he said so, the skirmishers on the Red Team's side charged over the central ridge. Olga's skirmishers smoothly shifted to respond to the new threat. Before they could take 2 steps, however, 4 large earth elementals erupted from the ground behind her skirmishers. The elementals snatched up the Blue Team's ground troops and hurled them into the diving bone vultures. Red Team's wing scattered, leaving Blue Team's wing to be blasted out of the sky. A wild cheer filled the air in response to the Red Team's devastating opening. How are they going to recover from that? Blue Team's air wing is hurt, Lady Zaradnik said, but they're far from out of the fight. Their controllers were deft enough to get away with only a handful of losses. Blue Team's surviving bone vultures scattered, flying low over their own side. Not willing to risk a pursuit, the Red Team shifted their momentum up the line, heading to flank the next group of skirmishers with their overwhelming advantage. The Blue Team wasn't content to wait for the inevitable outcome, however. Their side of the field was teeming with activity as they reorganized to counter the fresh breakthrough. How does anyone keep track of this? Dimir held her head in her hands. I think most people are content to wait for significant developments, Lady Zaradnik said. I know plenty of officers who would love to watch this, Rangobart said. No, pretty much any Imperial Knight would. This is entirely different from the Grand Arena. They are welcome to visit. Once the Empire upgrades its infrastructure and starts using Soul Eaters for transportation, Warden's Vale will be less than a day away from our winter. On the field, the Red Team's advance slowed noticeably. Puzzled, Rangobart looked around for the cause. What's going on? Lady Zaradnik gestured to their left. A group of 30 or so summons from Blue Team, including its scattered air wing and 2 large earth elementals, charged east toward enemy territory. Olga consolidated her right flank for a counteroffensive, the Baroness said. Raoul wasn't aggressive enough. That seemed plenty aggressive to me, Dimir said. The detached force smashed Raoul's left flank right in front of 100 screaming goblins. The little green demi-humans jumped up and down in excitement, wildly waving their fists in the air as the summons charged by. If Raoul had committed more forces to his breakthrough, they would have been too great of a threat to Olga's headquarters for her to try something like this. It seems that his experiences in the Draconic Kingdom are still affecting him. He's usually far more aggressive than this. What happened? He skirted too close to an active front, Lady Zaradnik said. His skeletal dragon was taken out of the sky by a beastman hunter and he fell into the Orakalon River. It made him miss a good part of the largest battle in the campaign. He's been a bit wary ever since. But you still won, right? Dimir asked. We did, the Baroness answered, but he still blames himself for being heedless. Another cheer rose as Olga's detached force trampled one of Raoul's hastily established defensive positions. Out on Olga's side of the field, Raoul's offensive was being worn down by small teams of ranged attackers harassing it as it tried to make headway. It looks like Olga's better at defense, too, Rangobard noted. She always has been, Lady Zaradnik nodded. Olga tends to let people move against her first and conduct a counterstrike based on what it looks like they're doing. Raoul used to be able to win anyways half of the time. How do you plan on having him overcome the problem? It hasn't been long since it started. I'm hoping that he'll overcome it on his own, but I'll see what I can do if it drags on for too long. With the bulk of the action shifting toward Raoul's headquarters, the crowd moved east along the stands to get a better view. Near the commander's tower, a more robust defensive line had been set up. 4 skeleton warriors stood alongside ranks of white supported by a troop of skeleton mages and archers. Undaunted by the superior forces arrayed to end their advance, Olga's forces charged headlong into them. The fight was incredibly messy, with the attackers seemingly intent on doing as much damage as they could with no regard for self-preservation. Rangobard shook his head at the grisly result. While the skeleton warriors survived only suffering a bit of damage, the rest of the defenders had been thoroughly mangled. Some question whether suicide charges like that should be allowed, Lady Zaradnik said. They are being done with summons, no? Rangobard said. Well, the argument is that one wouldn't do something like that with real troops. We can use summons the same way in real combat, though. After seeing this, I wonder if the Empire would have been better off raising conjurers rather than war wizards. I thought you mentioned that you were going to expand beyond the war wizard company concept. I am, Rangobard nodded. Seeing this has given me all sorts of additional ideas, though. Where are the skeleton warriors going? Dimir asked. Rangobard turned his attention back to the battlefield. The 4 skeleton warriors defending Raoul had abandoned their positions, following the invading detachment's path back to Olga's territory. It's his last viable strategy, Lady Zaradnik answered. His forces have suffered far too many losses to stand a chance against Olga's final offensive. All he can do is hope that he can hit her headquarters with his own detached force while her forces are committed to capturing his base. I highly doubt it will work, however. It didn't. Olga took her time scouting Raoul's base and, noticing that the skeleton warriors were gone, she went out of her way to find and destroy them. A white flag was raised over Raoul's base immediately after. Applause rose from the stands for both commanders' performances. And that's the first match, the Baroness said. The next one should start in roughly half an hour after new armies are resummoned and equipped. Will it be the same army? Rangobard asked. Unlikely, Lady Zaradnik answered. They are allowed to make changes to their army composition, but it comes at the cost of not being able to use the equipment they've prepared if they deviate too far from their original plans. We'll likely see minor changes here and there. How many matches will there be? 3 in total, the Baroness said. After that, the post-match festivities will be held in the village square. You're returning to Corlin Harbor tomorrow, so please enjoy everything we have to offer to your heart's content. You look relieved to be out of there. Do I? Rangobard opened a sleepy eye to regard Countess Waldenstein sitting across the carriage's cabin. For whatever reason, women love to make observations about him in their idle time and she was no exception. Traveling alone with them was a mistake. I'll be sure to drag 1 or 2 other guys along in the future. Admittedly, everything about his visit to the Sorceress Kingdom had been impromptu after his arrival, at least on his end. Still, that only meant he had to out-prepare any preparations that involved him in the future, or at least mitigate their effects. It probably has nothing to do with relief, Dimir said sourly. Those women were all over him last night. One can only hope that he didn't make any mistakes, Lady Waldenstein said coolly. Rangobard let out a tired sigh. Trying to defend himself was pointless and might make things worse. Besides, once the league matches ended, Olga won 2-1, he was bombarded by message spells from no less than 16 women. He told them he would be attending the post-match festivities as Baroness Zaradnik's guest, but they came after him anyway. That same night, he endured a siege where the magical lock he had cast on his door was dispelled 6 times. His 2 traveling companions interpreted the bags under his eyes in the worst way possible despite his protests to the contrary. The terraces of grain rolling by the window were suddenly replaced by the shadows of a tall forest. Rangobart straightened in his seat to examine the shoulder of the road. "What you looking at?" Dimir looked over his shoulder. "The road," Rangobart replied. "Building transportation routes through the blister is going to be a huge challenge, so I'm wondering how the Sorceress Kingdom does it in their heavily forested areas. Is it really that complicated?" Rangobart turned to frown at Dimir, but bumped his temple into her nose instead. The woman jerked her head back and fell onto her seat. "My fief isn't anything like the Imperial Heartland or the South where you had your promotional exam. The blister is half a swamp and the rest isn't much better. It's going to take the Empire decades to develop it if they resort to conventional means. This area looks like it gets a lot of rain, so they may have devised some solutions to the problems that we'll face." "I see. Are you going to do everything that you said you would?" "I don't see why I wouldn't," Rangobart replied. "In fact, I'm sure there will be much more to consider once the Sorceress Kingdom's adventurers have completed their survey." Needless to say, the opportunities that he was presented with were the sort that were best seized while the vast majority of the Empire was unaware of or averse to what the Sorceress Kingdom offered. He fully intended to build up as much of a lead as he could and stay there. "You are going to attract a lot of flies," Dimir said. "That much is obvious," Rangobart said, "but I question how effective they'll be. These fiefs aren't the usual titles stripped from one of the attainted, surrounded by developed land and a web of already entrenched relationships. None of the usual tactics will work and every neighbor is a comrade in arms. All of our trade will flow through Enns, and Lord Enz's son is a commander in the 2nd Army Group. He may very well be its general within the decade. Any factional attempt to get to the blister through Enns will fall flat on its face because the entirety of the blister is essentially a faction in itself. There should still be ways to get through to people." Dimir leaned back into her seat, crossing her arms over her midriff. "Minor houses would send their daughters to form alliances. Those with wealth to spare will invest in development. That includes merchants. Martial nobles and imperial knights are notoriously bad with money. There are going to be thousands of imperial knights looking for financial help after they squander their prize money." Rangobart recalled Harlow's attempted shopping spree after the awards ceremony. Dimir had a point. Normally, getting landed as an Imperial Knight wasn't so bad as one could look to their comrades for help after predictably making a catastrophic chain of poorly thought-out expenditures. It was pretty much a rite of passage in the Imperial Army and it was hard to argue with the notion that it built closer ties between the Imperial Knights. In the blister, however, thousands of Imperial Knights would be doing it at the same time. House Enns and many of the other noble families in the area would undoubtedly offer what support they could to make inroads in the new frontier. However, distant interests would still find plenty of vulnerabilities to exploit. If he was being honest with himself, Rangobart was plotting something similar. He figured that he could offer financial aid to his neighbors using some of the profits from his processing facilities to bind them closely to his bid to develop a major urban center. The idea that any one of his assumed allies might randomly fall for someone else's traps presented the possibility of unpleasant complications. He turned his gaze to the forests outside, pondering how he might secure dominance as they ascended the western slope of Warden's Vale. Rather than return to Calling County via the Katza River, Lady Zaradnik suggested that they take the land route north out of her territory to visit the western regions of the Duchy of Erantel. According to the Baroness, Countess Corlin predicted that most of the Empire would develop along similar lines to the fiefs they would pass through. For now, however, all he could see was vegetation. Over time, as he took in the occasional meadow, pond, and small ravine, he started to notice certain patterns hidden in the tangle of verdant growth. "There's something strange about this forest," he said. "Huh? What are you saying all of a sudden? Hold on, there, did you see that?" Dimir leaned over again to look out of his window, nervously gripping his coat sleeve. Across from Rangobart, Lady Waldenstein shifted over as well. "I think I missed it," Dimir said. "We are going too fast." "Just wait a minute or two and we'll see it again," Rangobart said. They awaited silently until the forest cleared slightly once more. This time, what he had spotted was much more apparent. There, Rangobot pointed at a set of collapsed timber frames. Those decayed buildings. It's an old village. What's that doing in the middle of a forest? Dimeo asked. Is it an abandoned logging settlement? No, he answered with a shake of his head. I'm pretty sure there were a handful of agricultural structures in there, and the villages are spaced as if they're amidst farmland. Baroness Saradnik mentioned that she reclaimed the frontier shortly after the annexation of Eranthal. This road we're traveling on is probably built on an older route connecting Warden's Vale to the highway. I never realized that Riestais was in such a shoddy state, Lady Waldenstein said. Wasn't Eranthal a royal duchy before the annexation? It was, Rangobart said. I'm amazed that House Vaself would allow its vassals to lose territory like this. Such a development would have been unacceptable, no, unthinkable to the Empire. He was raised under the impression that the kingdom was a rival to the Empire, but, upon closer inspection, the difference between them was likely vast. Never mind the bloated, stagnant country that imperial propaganda always painted it to be, the sites before them suggested that Riestais was physically rotting away while the Empire continued to slowly, but surely, expand. They passed the remains of yet another village, which looked to be in a slightly better state than the previous one. It was almost as if they were traveling through time, witnessing the stages of neglect and decay that had occurred over the generations. Then, all at once, the thick vegetation was replaced by carefully cultivated farmland as far as the eye could see. This must be Volkenheim County, Rangobart said. It's no wonder that the neighboring nobles object to Baroness Saradnik's style of territorial management. Her forests were farms in the past, so it's like she's denying the restoration of human lands. Given that the Sorceress Kingdom supports her in her efforts, Lady Waldenstein said, I doubt that their royal court cares about that bit of the duchy's history. I still haven't any clue about their development priorities, Rangobart said. Usually, one would see the hand of domestic policy by now, but all I can make out are the efforts of individual houses. It's almost as if the Sorceress Kingdom doesn't care about what they do so long as they do it well. What are the court council's dealings with the Sorceress Kingdom like? Their carriage slowed as they approached the first populated village. Many of its residents stopped to watch them pass through with wary expressions. Was it because traffic was rare, or was it due to the fact that they had come from Warden's Vale? Now that you mention it, Lady Waldenstein replied, they've been solely concerned with optimizing various aspects of the Empire. The overall direction of the country has been left completely in our hands. It is very difficult for most to take our protectorate status seriously until they realize this. Well, the commoners care little either way so long as their little worlds don't crumble around them. Oh, there's a crowd up ahead. Dimia pressed her nose to her window. I wonder what's going on. Rangobart reached up to open the driver's window. There wasn't a driver to speak of, so he ended up shouting for the Soul Eater to stop instead. The entire village appeared to be present, crowding the lanes near the magistrate's manor with hundreds of people. The villagers noticed their carriage stop on the road outside of the village, but no one moved to speak to or avoid them. He shared a glance with his two traveling companions, then Lady Waldenstein poked him forward. Rangobart cleared his throat before going up to address a group of women standing at the fringe of the crowd. Good morning, he said. What's going on here? It's... One of the women turned to reply, then stopped to stare up at him with a rapidly rising blush. The other women in the group reacted similarly as their eyes fell upon him. It's... Rangobart prompted. It's the reorganization, my lord. The village chiefs finally come in with the papers. Is that a good thing, or a bad thing? They say that it's good, the woman said, but what it is terrifying. I don't see why they can't leave well enough alone. The tenuous feeling in the air lent weight to the woman's words. Everywhere he looked, people looked frightened and uncertain. Do you have the details on what's involved? Rangobart asked, or perhaps seen it happen in a nearby village. Most of the women shook their heads. We haven't left the village since the Sorcerer King took over, the first woman said. Well, some went to see the new count's wedding, but that's about it, and that was months ago. They say they're lumping our lands together. Another woman said, have you heard of anything so stupid, my lord? Rangobart's eyes went to the strips of cultivated land beyond the village borders. Lumping your lands together, do you mean to say that they're consolidating your land into single, large tenancies? That's exactly right, my lord. Our lady said that the royal court wanted it and worse besides. There's nothing to be done, but it just ain't fair. They don't care about us small folk. He nodded in a gesture of sympathy, but that only served to turn their fearful looks hopeful. What did they expect him to do? In both the Empire and Riesties, a tenancy was measured in hides. Generally speaking, one hide supported one household, and trying to assign a tenancy as a single block of land was a sure way to drive any administrator crazy. The reality was that some land was more productive than others, and the sane solution was to divvy up a tenancy between different types of land. A tenant would have a strip of land by water, another near a bog, yet another on a hillside, and so on. In all, the productive potential of their collection of land would come out to one hide. If I understand it correctly, Rangobut said, the Sorceress Kingdom employs magic to ensure maximum crop yields regardless of land quality. It's what they say, my lord. We've been getting bumper crops every season, so it's probably true. The problem's that it's magic. Magic's gotta come from someone, doesn't it? What'll happen to us when that magic's gone? I know what. Another woman said, it happened in my great-grandpappy's time. The barony back then had an earth priest who used magic to grow the crops just like they're doing now. But then he got old and died. We all know what happened after that. The hard times, someone else nodded grimly. A century of suffering. We all got used to growing lots of food, and everything fell apart when we couldn't anymore. Half of the barony starved to death. The frontier lords couldn't afford the new food prices and collapsed. And then the raids started, my lord, another woman added. The goblins and ogres and what have you, using magic will only end in sorrow, the first woman nodded. We've already learned that lesson the hard way. It's best to live proper lives within our means. Together, the women outlined the critical weakness that lay behind any magically driven progress. There was no guarantee the magic one utilized in the present would be available in the future. Of course, it was almost impossible for first-tier spells to become unavailable unless magic casters were entirely absent, but third-tier spells like plant growth came from casters that were considered a rarity. Rangobart couldn't imagine the anarchy that erupted the moment people realized that their crop yields would be down by 2/3 for the indeterminate future. Only huge, country-spanning institutions had a chance of having at least some third-tier casters available every generation. Even then, the temples in the Empire only managed to produce 2 or 3 dozen earth priests capable of casting plant growth, and that wasn't anywhere near enough to serve the Empire's needs. It was easy for someone with a bit of knowledge to say, oh, you only need to do this and this and this to be successful, but reality was never so convenient. The Sorceress Kingdom isn't Riesties, Rangobut offered. Don't you think they'd have greater access to magic? That may be so, my lord, the first woman admitted, but this ain't anything like the Empire with their magic everything. I hear that even the farmers fly there. And they have magical farming tools that do all of the work themselves, someone added. I think that's just a bit of an exaggeration, Rangobut cringed internally. Have you considered traveling south to Warden's Vale? They seem to be making some great strides in many areas. As one, the women paled. A babe in the arms of one of them started to wail. We wouldn't dare, my lord. That place is bewitched. It's a stronghold of the Six. They've made a deal with some devil, they have. How else could they have survived when all of the other frontier nobles fell? The group of women turned away, some of them making sacred gestures as if to ward away evil spirits. Lady Zaradnik wasn't wrong, these people wouldn't be out of place in the Empire. While they might be close among themselves, rural villages were also quite insular. All sorts of strange ideas could entrench themselves with no one to say otherwise. With a slight gesture of his head, he motioned for Lady Waldenstein and Dimuia to return to the carriage. There, they waited to see what would happen as the reorganization was carried out. Do you think things will get ugly? Lady Waldenstein asked. I'm not sure, Rangobut answered. I didn't see any death knights in the village, so it's better safe than sorry. Land was always a touchy subject. He imagined that getting one's land arbitrarily shuffled around would be extremely upsetting. At least this is one thing that we won't have to worry about in the Empire, he said. You might if you manage to get your hands on some good druids, Lady Waldenstein said. I highly doubt it will be so easy, Rangobut told her. Besides, even Baroness Zaradnik is highly conservative about her fief's productive potential. She uses her surplus resources to develop her existing population and holdings rather than the usual course of seeing a surplus as a sign to increase the labor supply. I suspect that even if she were to stop using magic, her domain would still be comfortably self-sustaining. Is that what you plan on doing with that town of yours, then? I fancy the idea of having a comfortably wealthy population, Rangobart said. The citizens of Warden's Vale seem entirely content with their lives without needing all of the extravagances of the first and second-class districts in the Empire. Imperial policy has always considered all of those luxuries and entertainment necessary to keep the population docile, but she's shown us that this may not be the case. The resources would be better invested in development. Now it sounds as if she's converted you to the faith of the Six. I hope you know that a good part of that satisfaction is from them being indoctrinated into settling for less. Followers of the Six aren't the only ones who gain a sense of satisfaction from seeing their work amount to something, Rangobart replied. Take Nemel's people, for instance. Lady Waldenstein didn't seem to have anything to say in response. He didn't think that the Imperial administration would be averse to the idea. They were the ones always trying to get the most out of the Empire's resources, after all. In the village square, men filed into the magistrate's manor and filed back out with a scroll in hand. Many gathered in large groups where it seemed like they were trying to puzzle out their new territorial arrangements. Did they have to do this right now? Countess Waldenstein said, why not wait until the winter? Doing this while there are crops on the way is bound to cause unnecessary confusion. Would the court council wait until it is convenient to enact any mandates from the Sorceress Kingdom? The head Imperial Court mage sighed. Since it looked like everything would be settled relatively quietly, Rangobart ordered the Soul Eater to continue conveying them on their journey. They reached Croston, the new capital of Volkenheim County, 10 minutes later. A modest stone wall with wooden hoardings and narrow gatehouses protected an equally modest-looking settlement of several thousand. When they reached the gate, an elder lich came to the carriage window. Identify yourselves. Frianne von Gushmund, Countess of Waldenstein. Rangobartek Waira Burbad, Viscount of Brennenthal. Dimir Eriks, Timuia. Twin points of crimson light stared down at a clipboard as they declared themselves. A moment later, the undead mage looked back up again. Your arrival has been expected, it said. The elder lich stepped back and waved them through. The gatehouse's human guards gaped at them as they passed. Did we do something weird? Dimir asked. I don't think so, Rangobart answered. Maybe they're unused to people used to the undead? I haven't seen any in this town so far aside from that elder lich. Zaradnik said this place was similar to the Empire, Lady Waldenstein said. Is it anything like this in the Second Army Group's jurisdiction? Strangely, yes, Rangobart replied as he gazed out the window. This town wouldn't be out of place in the Empire. I wonder if this is what most of the Duchy of Erantal looks like. So far, they had been sent to a set of specific locations, all of which either showcased the future that the Sorceress Kingdom offered or the state of its allies and subjects outside of the Duchy of Erantal. It made sense that they wouldn't show the territories which weren't representative of their goals. I hope we don't get in trouble for this, Dimir said. We came on Zaradnik's recommendation, Lady Waldenstein said. That should mean we're fine. Does anyone have anything they want to do here? Rangobart asked. Not particularly, Lady Waldenstein answered. We are visiting another noble's territory unannounced, so I don't think we should draw too much attention to ourselves. Dimir agrees. I was thinking the same thing, Rangobart nodded. But I'd still like to get a feel for how the citizens are faring under their new ruler. The Sorcerer King, or Count Volkenheim, both? I doubt anyone would say anything against the Sorcerer King, Lady Waldenstein said. Also, we had the opportunity to get to know Count Volkenheim and his wife before your party arrived. He's a nice fellow. In other words, despite his imperial-sounding name, he didn't have any qualities that the imperial nobility considered useful. A nice fellow didn't gain any power unless they just so happened to possess extraordinary capabilities. Rangobart didn't have anything against the type, but they also weren't very useful connections as they were prone to being exploited left, right, and center by everyone else and never got anywhere for their time and effort. I'm not here to make an acquaintance of the Count, Rangobart said. He's in Corlin Harbor with the rest of the Sorceress Kingdom's nobles anyway. As for how the people feel about the Sorcerer King, just observing them as they go about their daily business should be telling enough. I'm going to walk around the town market. Are either of you coming? Lady Waldenstein took a look out the window. It's too crowded for me, she said. Dimmer will come. Dimmer, could you pick up a light lunch for me while you're out there? Sure thing. Dimmer stepped out onto the street after him, shading her eyes as she scanned the townscape. Oh, the Temple of the Four is still standing, she said. Your family is pretty devout, isn't it? Rangobart asked. Would you like to visit? It must have been weeks since you last attended a service. That's probably not a good idea. Why not? I feel like I might get caught up in something, Dimmer said. The temples are already crazy enough about the Sorceress Kingdom back in the Empire. I don't want to know what they're like here. He thought he could sympathize with her position. Temples of the same faith could differ in character depending on where they were. Getting caught up in local agendas would be awkward and unwelcome for any visitor, never mind someone from a noble house. In that case, he said, shall we take a stroll around the central plaza? Sure. Dimmer latched onto his arm. He stared at her for a good moment. You are not escorting me? Dimmer frowned up through her lashes at him. Rangobart faced forward again, trying to figure out how the market was arranged. Though the early morning rush was long over, it was still crowded enough that they could lose track of one another. Merchants noticed their fine apparel the moment they started walking toward the stands. Fortunately, Dimmer was more than happy enough to do most of the talking. The merchants, similarly, targeted Dimmer over him. Welcome, young madam. May I interest you in the newest pieces of woodcraft from the county's finest artisans? Wait a minute. Did he just assume that we're married? He looked at Dimmer out of the corner of his eye. She seemed entirely fine with going along with his presumption, chatting animatedly while poring over the merchant's display. As far as he could tell from the inventories displayed in the stalls around them, Croston didn't have any specialized industries. It was the plainest sort of urban center, one whose sole purpose was to service the rural lands around it. Oh, I like this, she gushed over a row of carved sparrows sitting on a branch. And it's a set. How much? The merchant listed a figure. Dimmer dropped some coins into his palm. Rangobart ended up with a bag in his hand. He didn't like where things were going.